Last October, my friends dared me to spend the night in Blackwood Forest, a place shrouded in local legend. They said no one could stay there from dusk until dawn without experiencing something terrifying. It was Halloween night, and wanting to prove them wrong, I took the dare. The forest was dense and silent as I hiked in, my flashlight casting thin beams of light through the twisted branches. As I went deeper, I noticed the usual sounds of nature. Crickets, rustling leaves, the hoot of an owl seemed absent. The air was thick, almost suffocating. The further I walked, the more the trees closed in around me, their branches reaching out like fingers. Eventually, I found a clearing to set up camp. I laid out my sleeping bag, sat down, and tried to relax. But the silence was too heavy, pressing in on me. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling as though someone or something was watching me from the shadows. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint, echoing laugh somewhere in the distance. I sat up, my heart racing, straining my ears to listen. The laugh came again, this time closer, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It didn't sound like a normal laugh. It was too high, too broken, like something mocking me from the depths of the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it into the darkness, but saw nothing. Just as I was about to convince myself it was all in my head, I caught a glimpse of something at the edge of the clearing. A figure, tall and thin, standing impossibly still among the trees. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. The figure didn't move, didn't answer. I wanted to get closer to see if it was just a tree stump or my imagination, but something in me screamed to stay put. The figure took a step forward. I stumbled back, clutching my flashlight tighter. The light flickered as I watched it come closer, moving slowly, almost gliding across the forest floor. The figure was dressed in tattered, old-fashioned clothes, like someone from another time. Its face was hidden by shadows, but I could make out hollow, empty eyes staring at me. Then it whispered, barely audible but clear, "Leave, while you still can." My blood ran cold. I couldn't look away as it stretched one bony finger, pointing deeper into the forest. My instincts screamed to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The figure's hollow eyes seemed to bore into me, piercing the darkness. Suddenly, it vanished. I gasped, shining my flashlight around frantically, but there was no trace of it. Just empty forest, quiet as ever. I was trembling, unsure if I was hallucinating, or if this was all part of some cruel joke my friends had set up. But then I heard footsteps, a slow, dragging sound coming from the direction the figure had pointed. Something was moving through the trees, and it was getting closer. I spun around, heart pounding, as a low moaning sound filled the air. I couldn't see anyone, but the footsteps didn't stop. They circled around me, slow and menacing, coming from every direction. I was trapped in the clearing, the sounds closing in on me, suffocating me. I called out, trying to break the silence, but my voice was swallowed up by the trees. The moaning grew louder, more agonized, like someone in pain. I looked down and realized the ground was wet. With blood, it was pooling around my feet, dark and cold, soaking through the earth. Then I heard it again, that mocking laugh. It was right next to me this time, and I whipped around, shining my flashlight wildly. In the beam of light, I saw dozens of faces peering at me from the shadows, their eyes hollow and lifeless, their mouths twisted in grotesque smiles. I stumbled back, feeling my skin crawl. I didn't know where to run, which direction was safe. Every face seemed familiar, as though they had once been people from my own town. Lost souls who had dared to enter Blackwood Forest and never returned. In a panic, I bolted, running as fast as I could through the trees. Branches scratched at my arms and face, roots tripped me, But I kept going, ignoring the whispers and moans that followed me. I could feel the figures watching, chasing as I crashed through the forest. Finally, I broke free from the trees and found myself on the main road. I collapsed, gasping for air, my heart still racing. When I looked back, the forest was silent, still, as if nothing had happened. But as I caught my breath, I saw something carved into a tree at the edge of the forest, a message scratched into the bark. It said, "Stay away." I didn't stay another second. I ran home and never told anyone what happened. But I'll always remember the faces in the forest, their hollow eyes watching, waiting for anyone foolish enough to step into their realm. And to this day, I still hear that mocking laugh echoing in my dreams, reminding me of the forest's dark secret.
It was Halloween night, and I was walking home alone after a small gathering with friends. The streets were empty, and a thick fog rolled in, making it hard to see even a few steps ahead. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. I lived in a small, quiet town, and nights like this were usually peaceful, but tonight, something felt off. As I passed an old, abandoned house on Maple Street, I heard a faint whisper. "Help me." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced around, trying to see if anyone was nearby, but there was no one. The whisper had come from the house itself. The house had been empty for as long as I could remember. Kids in town always made up stories about it, claiming it was haunted, but I had never believed any of those stories. Still, the whisper was so clear, so desperate. Against my better judgment, I felt drawn to it. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the house. The gate creaked loudly as I pushed it open, sending chills down my spine. The fog seemed thicker around the house, swirling around the old wooden steps. The air felt colder as I climbed the stairs, each step groaning under my weight. When I reached the front door, I hesitated. I wanted to turn back, to run, but something kept pulling me in. I pushed the door open, and it swung inward with a low, moaning sound. Inside, the house was dark, filled with the smell of dust and decay. Moonlight streamed through broken windows, casting eerie shadows across the floor. The house seemed to breathe, as if it were alive. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I could barely see anything in the dim light, but I could feel something watching me. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Help me, please." The voice seemed to come from the basement. I looked around, my skin prickling with fear. Everything in me screamed to leave, but something stronger pushed me forward. I found the basement door at the end of the hallway and opened it slowly. Darkness swallowed the stairs leading down, but I could hear the voice, soft and pleading. "Please, don't leave me." I swallowed hard and took a step down, gripping the railing tightly. As I descended, the air grew colder, and a strange, rotten smell filled my nose. The steps creaked beneath me, and I felt as if something were following me, just out of sight. When I reached the bottom, I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight. The small beam of light revealed a damp, empty basement with moldy walls and a dirt floor. But in the corner, something caught my eye, a small, old-fashioned doll lying on the ground. It was dusty and worn, its face cracked, but its eyes seemed alive. I stared at the doll, unable to look away. That's when I heard the whisper again, but this time it came from the doll itself. "Help me." I gasped and stumbled back, but my feet wouldn't move far. The doll's eyes were fixed on me, and they seemed to follow me as I tried to step away. "You can't leave now," the voice said, soft but cold. "I've been waiting so long." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My heart pounded, and my hands shook. The doll's cracked face seemed to twist, its eyes glinting in the dim light. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, and I was plunged into darkness. I tried to run, but I felt something cold wrap around my ankle, pulling me back. I fell to the ground, struggling against the invisible force. The whisper turned into a low, cruel laugh, echoing through the basement. "You belong to me now." Desperately, I clawed at the dirt, trying to pull myself free. I felt something sharp brush against my neck, cold and unyielding. Panic surged through me as the air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. Then, everything went silent. The grip on my ankle vanished, and the basement door creaked open. Gasping, I scrambled to my feet and bolted up the stairs, not daring to look back. As I burst out of the house, I could feel eyes watching me from every window. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was far, far away. When I finally looked back, the house was still and silent. But I could see a faint figure standing at the window, watching me, with eyes that gleamed in the moonlight. It was the doll, or something far worse. I never walked down Maple Street again, and on quiet nights, when the fog is thick, I still hear that whisper, calling me back to the house, waiting for me to return.
It started with a gift from my grandmother. She had recently passed away, and I inherited an old mirror that had been in her house for as long as I could remember. The mirror was large, set in an ornate wooden frame with delicate carvings. It had a slightly tarnished surface, making everything look a bit distorted. I hung it up in my room, not thinking much about it, but almost immediately, strange things started happening. The first night, I woke up feeling like someone was watching me. The room was dark and silent, but as my eyes adjusted, I glanced toward the mirror. In the dim light, I could make out my reflection, except something was wrong. My reflection wasn't lying down like I was. It was sitting up, staring at me with wide, hollow eyes. I blinked, and it was gone. My reflection was back to normal. I convinced myself it was just a trick of the light and went back to sleep, though I felt uneasy. The next night, it happened again. This time, I saw myself in the mirror, smiling. But I wasn't smiling. I was lying there, frozen in fear. My reflection's grin was wide, too wide, stretching across my face in a way that no real smile ever could. I shut my eyes, and when I opened them again, the smile was gone. I wanted to get rid of the mirror, but something stopped me. It was as if the mirror had a pull on me, drawing me closer each night. I felt compelled to keep looking, even though every glance filled me with dread. A few nights later, I heard whispers coming from the mirror. At first, they were soft, almost gentle, but as the night went on, they grew louder, frantic, desperate. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was pleading, as if someone trapped inside was begging for help. I tried to ignore it, but the whispers persisted, keeping me awake every night. I covered the mirror with a cloth, hoping that would silence it, but the whispers continued, louder, more insistent. Finally, I decided to confront it. I stood in front of the mirror, took a deep breath, and asked, "Who are you?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then my reflection blinked and tilted its head, studying me. It moved, but I didn't. I felt a cold, crawling fear as I realized it was no longer my reflection. It was someone else, someone who looked like me but wasn't. Then, the reflection spoke in a voice that sounded just like mine. "Let me out," it said, smiling that same wide, unnatural grin. I stumbled back, horrified. My reflection reached out, pressing its hand against the glass. I could see the fingers pressing against the mirror's surface, as if it were trying to break through. "Let me out," it repeated, its voice growing colder, more demanding. "I've been waiting so long." I turned and ran from the room, slamming the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night, and the whispers continued, growing louder and angrier. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed the mirror, took it outside, and smashed it against the ground. The glass shattered, scattering shards everywhere. But as I stood there, I heard a faint, echoing laugh, as if the mirror itself were mocking me. Relieved, I cleaned up the shards and tossed them away. I thought I was free, but that night, as I lay in bed, I felt a familiar, chilling presence. When I opened my eyes, I saw her. I saw her, my reflection, the one I had seen in the mirror, standing at the foot of my bed, watching me. Her wide grin stretched across her face as she leaned down and whispered, "Thank you for letting me out." And then she was gone. Since that night, I see her everywhere. In every reflective surface, every shadow, every dark corner. She watches me, smiling that terrible smile, waiting. And I know one day she'll take my place, just as she'd been waiting to do all along. It was Halloween night, and I was on my way home after a late shift at work. The buses had mostly stopped running, and the streets were nearly empty, so I was relieved to see one last bus coming down the road. I flagged it down, climbed on, and noticed right away that it was unusually dark inside. The lights were dim, casting an eerie glow over the empty seats. The driver, a man with a pale, almost ghostly face, nodded silently as I paid my fare. His eyes never seemed to meet mine, and his face was expressionless, almost like a statue. I took a seat near the middle of the bus, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that crept over me. The bus began to move, winding down streets I didn't recognize. I thought about asking the driver if this was the right route, but every time I looked toward the front of the bus, he was just staring straight ahead, unblinking. As the bus rattled through the empty streets, I noticed other passengers quietly boarding. They didn't walk in. They almost seemed to materialize in their seats, one by one. I glanced around, but every face was blank, lifeless, eyes staring forward, unseeing. No one looked at me or spoke. The bus stopped again, and a new passenger appeared in the seat next to me. A young woman with long, tangled hair and sunken eyes. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and she held her hands tightly in her lap, as if trying to hide them. I couldn't help but notice that her fingers were bent at unnatural angles, as if they'd been broken. I tried to ignore her, but she turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine. Her lips barely moved as she whispered, "Don't get off the bus." A chill ran down my spine. I forced myself to look away, trying to ignore the growing tension in the air. The bus felt colder, the air thick with something I couldn't explain, a heaviness pressing down on me. The bus stopped again, and another passenger appeared. This one was a man in tattered clothes, his face bruised and bloody, his eyes glazed over. He looked straight at me, just like the woman had, and whispered, "Don't leave." Panic was building inside me, but I felt trapped. I didn't know where we were, didn't recognize the streets. I tried to tell myself it was just a strange dream, that I'd wake up soon, but the faces around me were so real, so haunting. One by one, the passengers kept appearing. An old man with a twisted neck, a child with hollow eyes, a woman with a scarred face. Each one taking a seat, turning toward me, whispering the same warning. "Don't get off the bus." I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and stumbled toward the driver, my hands shaking. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. The driver's eyes met mine in the mirror, and I felt an icy chill run through me. His face twisted into a smirk, and he finally spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "This is the last stop," he said. "Everyone has to get off." I turned and looked back at the passengers, their hollow eyes fixed on me, their faces expressionless and cold. They all began to stand up, moving slowly toward me, blocking every way out. The whispers grew louder, their voices overlapping, filling the air with a chilling, pleading chorus. "Don't get off. Don't get off." I tried to push past them, but their hands were icy and firm, gripping my arms, pulling me back. The bus felt like it was closing in around me, like the walls were shrinking, suffocating me. Suddenly, I felt a sharp jolt, and everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the cold ground, surrounded by broken glass and twisted metal. The bus was gone. The bus was gone. The street was empty and silent, and there were no signs of life, no buildings or lights. Just an endless, foggy road stretching out into the darkness. As I struggled to stand, I caught sight of my reflection in a shard of glass on the ground. My face was pale, lifeless, my eyes hollow. I was one of them now. I am still on that road, still waiting, still trapped in that endless fog. And every Halloween night, when the last bus runs, I find myself there, watching for new passengers, waiting for someone to join us on the endless journey to nowhere. When my family moved into the old house on Elm Street, everyone warned us that it had a strange history. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Miss Harriet, had lived there alone for years until she vanished without a trace. People in town claimed she dabbled in strange practices, locking herself away in the attic, whispering to things no one else could see. On Halloween night, curiosity got the best of me. My parents had gone out, leaving me home alone, and I kept thinking about the locked attic door. I'd tried it several times since we'd moved in, but it was always locked. Still, something about that night was different. The house was too quiet, and I felt a strange pull toward the attic, like it was calling me. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way upstairs. The attic door stood at the end of the hallway, looming in the shadows. I reached out, half expecting it to be locked, but this time it creaked open under my touch. The attic was dark, filled with old furniture and dusty boxes, but in the middle of the room stood an old, ornate mirror covered in a dusty sheet. For some reason, I felt drawn to it, like it was the heart of the room. I pulled the sheet away, revealing a large, dark mirror with a golden frame, its surface thick with grime. As I stared into the mirror, something shifted. At first, I thought it was my reflection, but it wasn't. It was someone else. A woman with wild, tangled hair, her face pale and sunken, her eyes staring back at me with a hollow, haunted expression. I took a step back, my heart pounding, but I couldn't look away. The woman in the mirror leaned closer, her bony hand pressing against the glass from the inside. Her lips moved, forming words, but I couldn't hear anything. Then, slowly, I could make out a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Help me. Help me." Her voice sent a chill down my spine. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. It was as if the mirror held me there, pulling me closer. The woman's face twisted in pain, and she reached her hand through the glass, her fingers stretching out toward me. "Please, help me," she whispered again, her voice filled with desperation. I felt my hand lift, almost against my will, reaching out to touch hers. The moment my fingers touched the glass, an icy shock ran through me, and everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the attic. I was inside the mirror, looking out into the attic from the other side. I could see myself, my own body, standing there, looking blank and lifeless, my hand still pressed against the glass. Panic surged through me. I screamed, banged on the glass, but my reflection only stared back, a cruel smile spreading across my face. Her face, the woman in the mirror, had taken my place. I watched helplessly as she turned and left the attic, locking the door behind her. I was trapped, alone in the dark, my screams muffled by the glass. Now, I wait in the attic, watching, hoping someone will find the mirror and see me. I whisper, pleading for help, praying that someone will hear me and set me free. But deep down, I know the truth. I am just another soul, trapped like Miss Harriet, waiting for the next person to make the same mistake. And every Halloween, when the veil between worlds is thinnest, I feel the pull stronger, as if the mirror is hungry for a new soul.